My name is Natalie Ruiz. I'm a senior software engineer, 38 years old, and I've spent the last 11 years working at a tech firm in downtown Chicago. I used to think that keeping my head down, doing exceptional work, and avoiding office politics would eventually get me where I wanted to be. That belief shattered the day I stood in the back of a high-stakes executive meeting and watched my entire project, my sleepless nights, my breakthroughs, my heart get presented by everyone but me. There I was, arms crossed tight against my chest, heart thudding in my ears, as my team, if you could even call them that, walked slide after slide through a solution they barely understood. I had built every core module, written every line of critical code, and solved every failure point they had thought unsolvable. And yet not a single glance came my way, not even a nod of recognition. The spotlight was on them, and I was invisible. I remember watching our director Tom smile like a proud architect, pacing around as if the entire framework had emerged from his brain. He gestured at the screen with that smooth confidence of someone who'd never debugged through 3 nights straight. Every time he used the phrase we designed, I felt a fresh sting in my chest. I hadn't just designed it, I had lived it. It's strange how betrayal doesn't always feel like a knife. Sometimes it feels like quicksand. You don't scream or thrash because you're too busy sinking, too stunned to react. I stood there numb, trying not to let the heat behind my eyes spill out and betray what I felt inside. I could hear my own breath getting shallow. It felt like the air was being sucked out of the room. I wanted to speak, to interrupt, to say even just one sentence, but I couldn't find my voice. My name wasn't on the slides. I wasn't on the invitation list. I was simply removed, neatly erased, and no one seemed to notice. Not the VP who was nodding along, not the client rep jotting down questions, not even Mark, who'd once asked me to explain recursion like he was 5. I had become a ghost in my own career, not because I lacked skill or ambition, but because somewhere along the way, I'd convinced myself that being modest was noble, that the work would speak for itself, that truth would win. But truth doesn't win in silence. I know that now, and on that day in that room, in the middle of a presentation that should have been mine, I realized something had to change. Not tomorrow, not next quarter, now. I didn't know what I was going to do next. All I knew was that I couldn't keep swallowing myself to make space for men who didn't even know how the system worked. That was the moment everything shifted. The quiet fury started to boil, and once it did, I couldn't unfeel it. It started like most bad assignments do during the last 5 minutes of a staff meeting when everyone's already half out the door. Tom held up a thick printed packet and waved it like it was radioactive. The room shifted, eyes darted anywhere but his hands. He said something about a new logistics client with a chaotic backlog and unrealistic deadlines, then looked around like he was trying to pick the next victim. When his eyes landed on me, I already knew what was coming. "Natalie," he said, "why don't you take a first pass? Just get us something workable, even if it's rough." The tone wasn't a request. It was dismissal wrapped in politeness. I could see it in how his voice dropped half a tone, like it wasn't worth full volume. No one said anything, no offers to help, no follow-up questions. I heard Ryan chuckle softly behind his hand. Neil raised an eyebrow at him, smirking like they'd dodged a bullet. And maybe they had, because to them this project wasn't just difficult, it was doomed. And giving it to me wasn't a vote of confidence, it was a shrug of indifference. The brief was a mess. The client needed a predictive supply chain system that integrated live weather data, demand forecasts, and vendor variability across 4 continents. Their old system was breaking down daily. No clear data structure, no precedent, not a single successful case study in our archives. Tom dropped the folder on my desk later that afternoon like a piece of trash he wanted out of his hands. No guidance, no support, no strategy session to kick things off. Just that same unspoken expectation I'd learned to read years ago: let her try. If she fails, we never believed in it anyway. If she pulls it off, we take the win. It wasn't my first time seeing that pattern, but somehow it still stung, and maybe the worst part was pretending I didn't notice. Smiling tightly, nodding like it was fine, acting grateful for the opportunity. I walked out of that room with the folder in hand and bile in my throat, knowing full well I'd just been handed failure dressed up as a favor. It was 2:17 a.m. when the numbers finally aligned. I sat alone in the office, surrounded by empty coffee cups and cold fluorescent light, staring at a screen that had fought me for weeks. And then, like someone had shifted a lens just slightly, the logic locked into place. I remember blinking hard, trying to make sure it wasn't a mistake. I reran the simulation twice, then a third time just to be sure. It worked. It actually worked. The model adapted to live weather data, recalculated distribution nodes, and rebuilt optimized routes in milliseconds. I didn't cheer. I didn't jump. I just sat there, my hands trembling, tears welling in my eyes as exhaustion and disbelief washed over me in waves. My fingers hovered above the keyboard, unable to type, like they too needed a moment to understand what we'd just done. I called my mom. It was irrational. It was late. But she always answered. Her voice was groggy, concerned, and I couldn't even form words at first. I just cried, trying to explain the beauty of this thing I had built in a language she would understand. She didn't get the technical part, but she got me. She listened to my shaky breaths, heard the tears, and told me how proud she was. And in that moment, with my forehead pressed to the edge of my desk, I let myself feel proud too. I had built something that mattered, something no one thought possible, and I had done it in silence in the dark, with no one watching but me. It wasn't about credit right then. It was about the purity of the work, the brilliance of the breakthrough, and the quiet joy of proving myself right. 2 weeks before the presentation, things started to shift. At first, it was small. Meetings about final prep began popping up on calendars, ones I wasn't invited to. When I asked about them, I got vague answers like just alignment stuff or too many cooks, nothing to worry about. But I was worried. I noticed Darren from Biz Dev suddenly showing interest in the technical architecture, asking questions that mirrored my own documentation, almost word for word. Then Claire, who hadn't touched a line of code since the kickoff, was suddenly reviewing deliverables and giving feedback like she'd been there the whole time. I told myself I was being paranoid, that this was just how big projects wrapped up, that maybe finally I'd get to be surprised in a good way. But then I found the slide deck. I hadn't been asked to help create it, which was already strange. I stumbled across it on the shared drive while pulling logs at midnight. The moment I opened it, my breath caught. 42 slides, all clean, polished, branded, and not a single mention of me. Every architecture diagram I had labored over was there, stripped of notes, reformatted to look generic. The presenter's script outlined who would say what, Darren walking through the design, Claire speaking to the timeline, and Tom, of course, leading the final technical pitch. The algorithm. My algorithm. He was going to explain it like it was his. I scrolled back up, hoping I'd missed something. Maybe my name was buried in the appendix, the contributor list, or even the metadata. Nothing. It was like I never existed. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at my desk, staring at my own code base, wondering how many hours of my life I had given to people who would erase me without blinking. The next morning, I walked straight into Tom's office, heart pounding, hands cold. I kept my voice steady, as calm as I could. I pointed out the slide deck, mentioned carefully that my name wasn't listed anywhere, that the project had been my responsibility from day one. He didn't even look up from his phone, just mumbled something about it being an executive presentation and needing strong communicators. Then he glanced at me and gave me that smile I'd grown to hate, the one that pretended to be kind but dripped with dismissal. "You're more of a behind-the-scenes person," he said. "You're not really comfortable in the spotlight." I wanted to scream. Instead, I nodded slowly, forcing down the lump in my throat. I told him it wasn't about comfort. It was about ownership. He laughed softly and said I wasn't polished enough for the executive suite, that my presentation style was too raw. The way I dressed didn't inspire confidence. I stood there stunned. 8 years of late nights, perfect sprint delivery client saves, and quiet wins reduced to fabric choices and tone. It wasn't just erasure. It was an insult. I walked out of his office feeling small and angry, like I was 14 again and being told not to speak too loudly, not to be too much. Only this time, it wasn't high school. This was my career, my work, and I was done being invisible. The room was too quiet after the question. The Meridian CEO, Elena Vargas, sat at the head of the table, her expression sharp, her pen still in midair. She had just asked how our system adjusted to real-time weather disruptions in the Pacific corridor, and no one on my team had a clue what to say. Tom looked at Darren. Darren looked at Claire. Claire gave a hesitant nod to the slide, then said something vague about predictive modeling and historical trends. My stomach twisted. I felt the failure coming slow and inevitable, like a wave I'd seen build all year. I couldn't take it. I heard my voice before I even realized I'd stood up. The system adapts to live meteorological feeds, I said, and recalibrates routes through an event-weighted algorithm that accounts for historical weather anomalies and future forecasts. The fallback protocols engage automatically if variance thresholds are breached. Every head turned. The room stilled. My voice was steady, clear, and more grounded than I expected. I walked to the edge of the screen, gestured to the node structure diagram, and continued explaining how we integrated satellite data with vendor capacity in Southeast Asia. Elena narrowed her eyes. "And you are?" she asked. I took a breath. "Natalie Ruiz. I designed and built the entire system. That algorithm you just asked about, that's mine, based on my research and field data from the last 8 quarters. Tom started to speak, but she held up a hand. "Let her finish," she said. I kept going. I explained the design logic, the integration layers, and the decision matrix that automated route planning during climate events. I spoke like someone who had lived every cell of the system because I had. When I stopped, the silence felt heavier than the applause that followed. Elena looked right at me. "Thank you. That was the first clear answer I've heard today." My team stared at me like I'd just grown wings. Tom's face was pale, and in that moment I wasn't behind the scenes. I was in the scene, and I wasn't stepping back. As the room emptied and the sound of shuffling papers faded, Elena Vargas turned to me with that same calm focus she'd shown during the meeting. She didn't rush. She waited until the last person left, then gently closed the door. I was still clutching my laptop like a shield when she looked at me and said she wanted a quick word. Her tone wasn't critical. If anything, it was curious, even warm. She said the system presentation had been eye-opening, that my explanation had not only clarified the architecture, but demonstrated who really understood the product we were about to deliver. Then she asked who would be signing the technical specifications for the final contract. I hesitated. In my head, I still heard Tom's voice telling me I wasn't ready for executive attention. I said it would probably be him, since he was the department head. Elena didn't blink. "That won't work," she said. "The person who built it needs to sign it." "That would be you correct." I nodded, unsure if I was dreaming. She handed me her card, turned it over, and said her direct line was on the back. If there were any issues with this request, I was to call her personally. Then she smiled just slightly and left without another word. I stood alone in that conference room, the weight of it all suddenly crashing into my chest. It wasn't a victory, not yet, but it was the first moment I realized I might have a choice. For the first time in years, I wasn't just reacting to what was given to me. I was being invited to decide what came next. And that quiet shift, that glimmer of agency, was everything. I didn't sleep much that night. My mind kept replaying the meeting the way Elena had looked at me, the weight of her words. By morning, I knew what I had to do. I ironed my best blazer, the one I usually left hanging because it felt like too much, and printed out a 1-page document I'd written at 3 a.m. It wasn't a resignation. It was a list of terms. When Tom called me into his office, he was already mid-rant, accusing me of undermining the team and embarrassing him in front of a client. I let him talk, let him pace. Then calmly, I slid the paper across the desk and told him I would sign the contract under a few conditions. First, I would be listed as the lead architect in all project documentation. Second, I would lead the implementation phase and build the team myself. Third, I expected a raise 15% effective immediately. His laugh was instant, sharp, dismissive. But I didn't flinch. He said I didn't understand how this worked. That no one gets everything they want. That this was a team win, not a solo act. I listened, then repeated myself slower this time. If my name wasn't on the specs, Meridian would walk. I wasn't bluffing, and we both knew it. He tried to call it extortion. I called it negotiation. For the first time, I saw the shift in his face, that flicker of calculation when he realized I wasn't asking, I was deciding. My hands were cold, my stomach tight, but my voice held steady. I'd spent years waiting for recognition, believing it would come naturally if I just kept performing. But the truth is, power isn't something you earn silently. Sometimes, you have to claim it. And I was done whispering. Tom didn't take it well. His face darkened the moment I pushed back, and by lunchtime I had a meeting on my calendar with HR. The tone was cold from the start. Vanessa from HR sat across from me unreadable, while Tom leaned back in his chair, arms crossed like he was watching a show he expected to end in his favor. They called my request insubordinate. Said my approach had been aggressive, that I was making demands instead of collaborating. I nodded through it, holding my breath, afraid that if I spoke too soon, my voice would crack. Because the truth was, I was scared. Scared I'd gone too far. Scared I'd misread the power I actually had. But then I remembered Elena's words. Her card is in my bag. The fact that Meridian wanted my signature and no one else's. That wasn't a bluff. That was leverage. So I said nothing until Vanessa finished reading from the script she clearly hadn't written herself. Then I repeated what I had said in Tom's office word for word, this time with more steel. When I walked out of that room, my legs felt like jelly. I made it to the bathroom before the tears came. It wasn't sadness, it was pressure finally released. I had bet my career on a single act of self-respect, and I didn't know if it would cost me everything. Hours passed. Then Vanessa returned to my desk, tight-lipped but formal. They would agree to most of my terms. My title would reflect lead architect. I would be given the authority to select my implementation team. The raise would be 12%, not 15%, but it was more than what they offered before. I signed, not because I got everything, but because I got enough. Enough to prove I wasn't disposable. Enough to know I wouldn't go back to shrinking myself just to survive. And as I slid the paper across the table, I felt something shift inside me for good. I hadn't just asked for what I deserved. I had taken it. The weeks that followed moved fast. Once the contract was finalized, I stepped into my new role leading the implementation team. For the first time, people looked to me not just for answers, but for direction. I built the team intentionally. I brought on 2 junior developers who had been overlooked for years, sharp, eager, and hungry to prove themselves. Our war room became something different. No longer a space of stress and isolation, it turned into a place where ideas were shared openly, where people felt seen. We checked in with each other, shared wins big and small, and worked like a true unit. The system went live ahead of schedule, running cleaner than even I'd hoped. Every week I had direct calls with Elena from Meridian. She never rushed, always asked how I was really doing, and took every update seriously. Her belief in me never wavered, and that steady trust became an anchor. I didn't realize how much I needed that until it was given freely. 3 months in, she invited me to coffee. Nothing formal, no office, just a quiet cafe a few blocks from their regional office. She told me the implementation had exceeded their expectations, that the board had noticed the numbers, and that it was rare to see something so complex executed with such clarity. Then she paused and said something I didn't see coming. They were building a new innovation division, and they wanted me to lead it. Not join, lead, as director, with a team, a budget equity, and full authority. My first reaction was disbelief. My second fear was, and my third, hope. I didn't answer her right away. I said I had to finish what I started, that my team deserved that. She nodded. There was no pressure, just a promise the door was open. And when I walked back into my old office, I felt different. The same desks, the same carpet, but everything in me had shifted. I had spent so long trying to survive inside broken systems that I forgot it was possible to build something better. That someone could see your worth and not use it, but amplify it. I didn't know what my future held yet, but I knew this: I wasn't afraid of it anymore. 3 years later, I stood on stage at a national tech conference speaking about innovation and equity in software leadership. The room was packed, and as I scanned the audience, I saw familiar faces. A few were former colleagues from my old company. Some had followed me to Meridian. Some had left that place long before I did, but still carried its weight. And in the very back row, I saw Tom sitting with his arms crossed, looking older, smaller. After my talk, a young developer named Zoe came up to me. She looked nervous, clutching a notebook like it was armor. She said my story sounded like hers, that she had been doing the work all of it, but the credit never stuck. Her voice cracked when she said she'd started to believe maybe it was her fault. I took her hands and told her what I wish someone had told me back then. It's not your fault, it's the system. And your silence, no matter how carefully shaped, will not protect you from it. I told her about Elena's offer, about the panic and exhilaration of taking a leap, about the nights I cried in the bathroom and the mornings I stood tall anyway. I told her what I tell every woman who feels invisible: your voice has value. Your work has weight. Use both. 5 years out, Meridian's innovation division had grown beyond anything I imagined. We had launched platforms that reshaped industries, hired dozens of engineers from backgrounds like mine, from stories like Zoe's. We didn't just build products, we built culture. And that culture gave people space to thrive, not just survive. One morning, I opened an email from a recruiter working on behalf of my old company. They were searching for a new VP of technology, someone with experience rebuilding innovation pipelines. I didn't laugh. I didn't gloat. I simply forwarded the posting to a few brilliant women I knew, along with a note: ask for what you're worth, then ask for more. The best revenge was never about watching others fall. It was creating a world where what happened to me wouldn't happen to them. A world where young women don't have to fight just to be seen, where leadership looks like them, where success isn't stolen, it's shared. And every time I see someone like Zoe take their first bold step, I know we're getting closer.